All right, good evening, everybody. Hello, I'm Janet Vogel. I'm the director of the Hiram College Library. I'm so excited to see so many of you here in person. The nice weather was a reason for me to come out and hear about gardens, I think, right? And we do have plenty of friends on Zoom. So that's why we will be using microphones today. And I will actually moderate if you have a question here in the audience in person. I'll moderate, bring a microphone to you so that you can ask your questions so that the folks on Zoom can hear. And then I'll do the same with any questions that are asked on Zoom. I do want to point out just a couple of things before we get started. Number one, please do support the Friends of the Library book sale. That will begin on March 23rd. We have a couple of flyers over there on the table. For those of you who are not Friends of the Library members, check out the Flyleaf, which gives you an update about Hiram College Library events and activities. And also, of course, you have an opportunity to join the Friends of the Library. For our students here, it only costs $5 to join the Friends of the Library. And for the rest of you wonderful folks here, $30. But worth it. It supports some of the great programs and events that we offer here through the library, including this one. But the Friends of the Library have also sponsored renovations in the building. So this particular room, the lighting is brand new, the paint is brand new, the sound system is brand new. So we are very thankful for all of those opportunities, and the Friends paid for the lighting and the painting. So we are thankful for that. The Friends also contribute funds for all of our books and the streaming media that we use in our classes and our online classes. So we are thankful for that. And without, I have one more thing to announce on the sheet. I also thought that this particular audience would be very excited to hear about the upcoming Thistle Symposium. So we have flyers up at the front for that as well. So this one will feature Thomas Bacher from the class of 78. He just finished a book about the history of Hiram College that he worked with David Anderson on. And we're really excited to have that. So they're doing a special event with him. It includes acting. The president, I'm told, is James A. Garfield. Is that right? Oh, I'm sorry. That's a secret. You didn't hear that from me. That's what I get for knowing somebody in the show. And so that will be on Wednesday, March 22nd at 7 p.m. So definitely mark your calendars for that and take a slip with you when you go. And without further ado, I will introduce Ella Kirk, who is the Friends of the Library president and also professor of French here at Hiram.
I'm not going to start, the stars tonight, we have two of them, Lucy Chamberlain and Denny Taylor. And it is really my honor to introduce those people tonight. So Lucy Chamberlain obtained her master's degree in landscape ecology, design, and maintenance from the University of London, following her graduation from Hiram College in 1977. She is a horticulturalist, botanist, and she specializes in plant identification, selection, planning, design, and related landscape maintenance and management issues. Lucy's work experience also includes designing and installing a new Shakespeare garden with interpretive methods and materials at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, working with Nurturing Restoration Incorporated to consult with private landowners on woodland restoration projects and working with neighborhood community garden projects throughout New York City via the Cornell University. Lucy has also done significant educational work, including teaching public gardening programs for all ages, from kindergartners to adults, as well as college level courses in plant identification and landscape planting design. So welcome, Lucy, for tonight. And then I will proceed now to Denny. Now we select my glasses. After graduating from Hiram College in 1973, Denny Taylor continued his education at Cornell University, where he earned a doctorate in ecology. He returned to Hiram in 1979 and taught biology for many years. And in 2007, he began the Igniting Streams of Learning and Science program dedicated to improving learning in science. This also included the Learning Streams International Program, a partnership between Hiram, Case Western Reserve University, the Shoals Marine Laboratory in New Hampshire, Cleveland Metropolitan Public School District, and Pakistani high schools and universities, for which he received nearly a $500,000 grant in 2014. Pretty impressive. So then Taylor, after that, he also traveled around the world, recruiting students and sharing the importance of liberal arts education. He is now a professor emeritus and continues to be involved with campus and community activities, from the Hiram Public Gardens to his work with the Learning Students International. He is also the president of the Hiram History Society. So welcome, Lucy, and
thank you, Janet and Laura, for those nice introductions, and thank you for inviting us to be here tonight. So I just wanted to say there were many people who have impacted the formation of the Hiram Public Gardens over the years, and but we're going to focus on a few of them. And one of the things that they understood was how to create a sense of place, and not only create a sense of place, but also to bring community together to work together on projects. And that they remain an inspiration to us, at least today, and for others. And I think it's something that's very special about Hiram in the fact that it's had these gardens for all these years. So,
Lucy,
oops.
I think that's.
Oh, it's not on? Whoops.
She's too far away.
Into it, yeah, okay. Oh, I could just. Got it. Is that better?
yes,
Okay, sorry. Anyway, it's. Okay. So first of all, you may ask why would gardens be important in Ireland, you know, and if you were to go into the archives, you might find this photograph that's in the 1840s. And you begin to realize quickly that there were hardly any trees here back in the 1840s. So when Hiram was, the college was initially established, it seems natural that people would want to begin planting trees and gardens and orchards and anything to try and enclose their properties and begin to feel more at home in a landscape that was almost a barren, wide open space. So let's. There we go. So in eventually we came to starting, you know, fast forward, we established several public gardens, and the first was the Bobby Castle in 1974, and I had I had come to Hiram in the fall of 1973, and John Shaw, oops, okay, I'm not quite on sync here, but okay, so there are a lot of other Hiram public gardens, but the ones that we're going to concentrate on tonight are the 7 Hiram public gardens, and these are some of the examples of many other gardens that were also on campus. And as it says, we're not going to talk about these, but I will mention one, and that happens to be the picture in the over there is of the Squire family house, which is now been replaced by the Kennedy Center. And so you know where that is. But Squire he moved to Hiram from Mantaway, where he was a country doctor, but he wanted his son Andrew to become to go to school here, and that was the Eclectic Institute at that time. And so Andrew Squire went to Hiram and then went on in his education and eventually became the founder for Squire, Sanders and Dempsey, which you may have heard of. It's quite a large corporate law firm. And but his father was, being a country doctor, was interested in medicinal plants, and so it's likely that around this house were plants for medicinal purposes. But the house was then turned over to the college in 1955, and then later was replaced by with the present day Kennedy Center. So anyway, that's just an aside there. And then the Bonnycastle Inn, which you may not recognize because it still has its old porch on it that was later removed when they did a restoration. But Professor Shaw and Julie Chamberlain Shaw, Chamberlain you may relate to the San Hewitt of Akron. Anyway, they went on a sabbatical in the early 70s, 1970s, I believe. And during that time, Shaw got this brainstorm about teaching this course. He was a Shakespearean scholar, but he taught English literature. And so he formulated this garden project. And the idea was to teach all the early, from the English literature coverage of from early biblical times, the enclosed gardens and all that, all the way up to the early Victorian views of gardens. And so anyway, in the fall of 1973, I got a note from John Shaw. I was just a freshman. I had no idea what was going on. And he said, come see me. And he said, well, I'm going to be doing this garden project in the spring. So won't you come along and help me? He knew I liked gardening. And so I said, sure. I didn't have any idea what was to come. But anyway, that was how it went. So anyway. Then, so in the spring, in addition to our classwork where we're reading literature and doing all kinds of things, we also were asked to create a garden. And but before we could even do that, we had to go out and clean up the backyard, which wasn't so easy as you think. There was lots of trash and things, old tires and shards of china and all kinds of loads and loads of stuff we took out. But finally we got it cleared, and then the next thing we all came together and everybody was to figure out some way that you could incorporate some of the features that we saw in the design process that we had studied from biblical times up to the present. So everybody put their heads together, and this was the final design that we came up with. And you can see there were one idea, this object over there, that was actually meant to be a turf seat. And a turf seat is an Elizabethan thing that you sit on, and it's supposed to have fragrant herbs that come up and as you crush them while you're sitting there and talking to your sweetheart and all that. But anyway, you can see it kind of never quite made it. It was too shady to begin with, and it kind of ended up looking more like a barbecue pit. But anyway, eventually that disappeared. And then we went on to, and then there were other features. One of the other ideas was a gazebo, which began up in the upper left-hand corner. And you can see these things sort of had an evolution. And so that was the first one. And then over on the right-hand corner, we have another modification of that. And then someone went up to Strawberry Banks and saw this fabulous design for a summer house gazebo, and they got the students working on it and created an example of that. So onward they went. So this is what was happening throughout the garden. The knot's another example. This is originally, this was meant to be an Elizabethan knot enclosed in stonework. And in the middle shot at the top, you can see the stones that edge the outer edge. That was all done very carefully by students. They learned how to lay stones. And then, but I'm jumping ahead. The first of the knots was over here on the left. And it was surrounded, it was raised beds using wood planks because we didn't have fancy stone or anything to work with. So that was and soon that sort of fell apart, and then it went into another version of brick. And then finally, we discovered there was a wonderful stone artisan not far from the college, Ron Fedor, who helped us redesign the garden with these beautiful locally hewn sandstones from, it's all Berea sandstone. And then we used other locally sourced materials like crushed brick for the color of the stones, and then slate and sandstone gravel and river gravel. So it all created a pattern, and the idea was to reduce all the maintenance that came with having to clip all these little plants and stuff. But anyway, it too is susceptible to getting weedy like every other garden, but you can see the evolution of the design and the beautiful stone. And this has this lovely octagon shape, and the garden was dedicated to Hester Crawford, and she loved Jefferson and studied him. And Jefferson, one of his favorite geometric forms was the octagon. So anyway, and then these are a lot of the flowers, the spring flowers, the hellebores, and the Hester loved blue flowers. So we planted lots of blue flowers, and this particular Glory of the Snow is a spring blue flower, and then the guinea hens and the tulips, the little species tulips, all of that fit into the Elizabethan knot design and in the surrounding beds. So anyway, onward we go, and as you see, you let a few years go by, and before you know it, you've got a nice weed patch. And so here we are trying to map out this part of the garden, but as you can see, if you have lots of good students, and Denny was really great at this, is corralling in his students and getting them to help. And here they're planting an oak tree, which is actually planted right in front of Bonnycastle, and you can go and see it today and see how it's coming along, I hope. So I think.
Well, thanks everybody for coming, and those who are online, thanks for listening. This shows that it was no small labor over the years to get these gardens established. We would rope students into going around and picking up any kind of stones that they could find. Some of them were gigantic stones from Old Hinsdale. There was a quarry in Hiram, and indeed they got them all together, and we built a wall in a place where there was just a weed patch on the side of Bonnycastle. And the students were so good at building it, it's still intact. It hasn't changed at all. Pendleton House was the second garden of the Hiram Public Gardens, and it too was started before Hiram Public Gardens became an entity. Professor Roland Layton was in history, and when Pendleton House was turned from a student dormitory into the history house, Roland had already started the project of building Pendleton House Garden. It was a very different kind of garden, as you can see from the design, many more open spaces with the plants all around the periphery. And this sort of joke with Penis was from Roland, and he believed in double digging, which meant that you dig up the whole garden and then you move everything and you dig it up again. And then that supposedly creates a great base, but it doesn't if you're in clay that has a lot of water running downhill. So it didn't really work as well, but we were able to amend the soils thanks to a neighbor, Walchinchek, who donated lots of good soil that he had made from leaf compost, and it really enriched the gardens. So you can see that there were border gardens running along the side, a typical kind of English border with lots of jonquils and English flowers in the spring months. And then through the middle of the garden was just big grass beds. And that was so that students could play badminton, croquet, they could have bowling, they could have whatever they wanted to, Guy Fawkes Day celebrations. And then in the back, supposedly there was an azalea garden, which you can see clear here on the right. And the azalea garden, it's such a nice idea, but you know, plants, you have to plant according to the light that is available. And Exbury azaleas, yeah, they don't do really well in absolutely bright sun, but you can't have them in shade or they die out. And indeed, the azaleas tended to die out over time. So you learn by trial and error when you're a gardener, and certainly that's what we read in the notes about all of these gardens. The weekend college, one of the problems with gardens is everybody likes to build a garden, but nobody likes to take care of them. Oh, let's build a new garden in Hiram. As you saw, we have 30 of them. And after the 7th, I said, no, we're not going to take care of the new one you're building, so don't build it. But people built them anyway. So the third garden was Copper Beach Park. It was the home of Professor Bailey Sutton Dean, who was a history professor, I believe, and he taught other things. It's over next to the tree house. And the house was torn down. It was a beautiful Greek revival. And this is Professor Dean sitting in his in front of his apple tree. There was a big copper beech, one of the few in the area that must have been there 100 years already. When the house was torn down, the beach was left. But then sometime in the 70s or 80s, the college decided to put in a parking lot on the west side. And Ellen Jago, the wife of the president, came over and said, not while I'm here. And so she stopped the parking lot from extending on the whole property and kept the beach alive. But anybody who ever has worked with trees knows that the roots of the tree extend how far? Double the width of the drip line. And so if you cut the roots any shorter than that, then you really limit the trees, and beech trees are no exception. They are really sensitive to changes in water structure. So when the parking lot went in, the beech began to fail. But then when Gearstacker was put in, the rooting was right on the other side of the tree within about 10 feet, and it cut the rest of the roots. And anybody who works with trees knows it's 5 years after construction that the tree dies. So people will always call up and say, why is my tree dying? And they say, well, did you construct something 5 years ago? And the answer is always yes, or 6 years ago. So here's the beech tree that replaced it. It was trustee Richard Thompson, who loves trees and forests, and he put in the new copper beech. And the garden has undergone great changes. It was a shade garden, but guess what? When a beech comes down, there's no shade anymore. And so all the plants died. And it was just empty. And luckily, our good friends from environmental studies took it over and said, aha, we need to have a new purpose for new times. And built a pavilion and took the concrete structures for the playground that the faculty women's club had provided. And they created a new educational garden that has been a nice reuse of that facility. And it also meant that they're taking care of the gardens. Thank you very much. There's also the Missionary Memorial Garden, which is the 4th garden. This is one that was right at the end of the parking lot at the church, right in front of the village hall. And it was always an annual garden. When I came to town, Roland Clayton said to me, point blank, you're taking care of this. It wasn't, I'd like you to take care of this. It's you're taking care of this. Come over, I'll show you how to do it. But it was always sort of a garden that was out of place. It was in the sun, and it didn't really have any relationship. As Lucy always says, it didn't read. And gardens that don't read mean that you look at them and you think, what's it doing here? So we kept it. I tried to turn it into a perennial garden. It didn't work as a perennial garden. And then eventually the church took it over and let it die out. And instead built that beautiful garden that's right behind the church that has lots of purpose and it reads really well. So there is, if you go to look for the Missionary Memorial Garden, you'll see the little stone that's left in the middle of the grass field. You can see it right at the end of the middle picture. There were lots of missionaries who went from Hiram College to India and China, and there are great stories if you want to talk about them afterwards. But I live in the Wharton Memorial Christian Missionary Society house, which was owned by Hiram College and the Disciples Church, so that the children of missionaries could come and lead a good Christian life in my house. So enough said. And now we're on to the fifth garden.
So, Jamie wasn't easily daunted by anything, and apparently this house, which was on the site of, you'll know where Maggie's Donuts are. So anyway, that used to be a bank, and so anyway, she got it in her mind to, you know, to relocate that house because they were going to tear it down and, you know, build this bank, which wasn't, well, we won't go there, but anyway, so she went ahead and started getting funding, and then she had to figure out how to, and in the meantime, figure out how to move it from where it was over on 82 across to across from the police station where it is now. And here you can see the house after it was just moved, and then again after it's been restored with the gardens around the foundation. Anyway, Jamie had real drive, and that's what's moved things for a long time through many years. She worked on so many projects, and so we wish that was the kind of leadership we could regenerate in the college, in the village of Hiram, to get more people excited. But she really took the bull by the horns and really got a lot done. So let's see, we're going here. And here's a shot. And what the garden is focused on was having plants of the mid-19th century. And this is a list that was in the archive of all the plants that they had listed that they could use in their design. And then one of the early designs that they used is with the 3 beds there and the actual planting. But when Jamie in the late, I think it was the 1990s, was yeah, when Jim Barrow, the biology professor, retired, she wrote out in longhand all kinds of instructions about how to take care of the gardens, who will take care of what garden and everything. She left that, and we've seen that in the archive for sure. But unfortunately, a lot of the people that she assigned those projects were elderly also, and before you know it, they were retired. So this is what happens when you leave a garden for a few years without anybody tending it. I'm sure you've been familiar with this if you're a gardener. It's a common problem. So this is what Denny inherited when in the early 2000s of trying to bring in these gardens again. And he was working in, let's see, this is yours.
I constantly got my classes involved in gardens, and it was just called free labor. And so the weekend college class on plants and horticulture was meeting every other weekend, and we came over and they redesigned the whole garden. You can see it's an octagon, and it was moved so that it's right in line with the house, giving a clear vision from the house. We brought over all those paving stones from all over campus, including the great big gigantic one in the front, which meant that most of us could not move this or even think about moving it. But luckily we had a lot of, and this is Jim Barrow and Jamie Barrow's son. James Barrow Jr. and his wife and one of his sons when we dedicated the garden to Jamie because of everything that she had done. There were so many people. David Anderson cut the grass for decades over at Bonnie Castle. He did gardening work over at Mahan House. People would just pitch in because this was community and it was all about community. But the real community is if you're going to move a great big paving stone from the 19th century, you either have a lot of horses or you have students who are weightlifters. And so David and Zigfrid both know Seth on the right, who got 3 of his buddies and they came over and with one finger, they lifted the stones up and moved them for us. In the middle is Dan Scott, an economics major, who discovered that he really had a passion for plants. He went to work at Mount Vernon and he then moved on to one of the big horticultural institutions, and that's his profession today. And on the left are Katie Remora and Michelle Crowell. Michelle is up in Alaska doing work, not in horticulture, but the kind of work that she did here and the work that Katie does with the state of Ohio really prepared them for their future careers.
So if you look at these budgets and you think of what budgets look like today, these are sort of worrisome because the amounts are almost laughable. But these were actually some of the notations that Jamie had in her files about the early beginnings of the Herd Garden. The Herd Garden was located, the Herd House was located out in front of where the library, where we are now in the library off to the left, and it was the offices of the 2 doctors Herd, Frank and Eric, I think it was. And they, between them, had practiced something like 100 years in the Hiram region as far as being country doctors going out and serving the community. So anyway, there was a point where the house became a shambles. It was given to the college and it was used for psych and various, they did a lot of experimental work with animals there. But it reached a point where it was just falling apart. And so it was decided the garden, the house would be raised, and in its place, they were thinking about a parking lot. I think there was actually a parking lot behind it, but Jamie got wind of this, and Jamie, as I said, wasn't daunted by much. So she quickly began to work on what could be done. And this was the first year they went out and planted green manure crops on the ground because it was very compacted. The soil was very poor. So anyway, she got organized and reached out to a lot of friends. And one of the friends she reached out to was Frank Samuel, who was also an alumni of Hiram and did many wonderful things. We'll talk about that. And he happened to send back this image of a gleaming white building, Capitol building on a hilltop, and this lush parkland around it. And I think it was sort of a veiled comment on Jamie's grandiose ideas of what she was envisioning for Hiram. But anyway, she writes this long letter explaining to, and drawing Frank into all the detail and how much it's going to cost and everything else. So there it goes. But she was, she really had plans. And and soon Jamie got Valerie Strong, who was the wife of her former husband was Kimo Yogarinas, the history professor. But she was quite a talented landscape architect and designer, and she put together a design, and she had a wonderful sense of looking at the place and seeing what it was all about. And this being right next to all the science lab building, Colton Lab across the way, and now Gerstacker to the west. She went up in the labs and she saw that plaster model in the middle of a cross section of a flower, and you could see the circuitous line that the pollen grain followed right down into the ovary. And that became what she used as her model for the path design. And if you've ever walked through the herd garden, you know there's that wonderful spiraling path line. And it's if you don't know the plan on paper, you might be rather confused by what's going on. So that's where what inspired Valerie. So anyway, so that was another move that she got organized, she got a committee going, and Valerie came in, and later Valerie wrote a book, this All My Clocks, and she describes in chapter 19 the whole process of working with a committee of folks and how, you know, you have all these different personalities and dealing with that. And the herd garden moved right along. There were students planting trees. There was another student that built that urn that was the first central feature in the garden. And so there were a lot of things happening. And then the herds, one of the things I enjoy when I work in the gardens is that often, just about every year, some of the herds will come back and visit the garden. It's sort of sweet, but this happens to be one day when they came by, and I snapped a picture of them near the plaque. And these are just some various different garden images of the paths and the lion fountain that is now replacing the urn that you saw in the first picture. Again, another evolution in gardens. You see a pattern here as time moves on. And then, you know, all the different seasons, you get spring flowers, and then you get another bloom in the fall, and lots of butterflies and all kinds of different insects, and you know, lovely colors and combinations of textures. It's just a wonderful place, and it's a lot of fun to sit and just quietly enjoy it or walk along the paths. There's always something new to look at. And with time, and actually pretty quickly, there were lots of articles that were published about the gardens. And the Great Lakes Herb Symposium was held here in Hiram for several years. They used the Hiram College as a base and the campuses. So it got, you know, it helped the college too in terms of giving a recognition, and people learn about the college while they're here. And Susan McClure wrote several little blurbs through her book about the Herd Memorial Garden, and also about Jamie's plan to get to start the Hiram Public Gardens as a model as a way to raise money so that you're not just creating and proliferating lots of gardens, but that you also have a source of funding, that you get members to help out with gardening, but you also find in organizations that might fund you and stuff. So she was great to offer those mentions in her guidebook for Midwestern Gardens. And then the Herb Society also, in addition to the symposium, and the Western Reserve Herb Society wrote up articles about the gardens and how they evolved and were created. So they got a lot of interest and coverage, and it brought a lot of attention here in the summer months especially. So here we have again some of the pretty flowers, that lovely anemone pulsatilla up in the corner. The purple was a spring blooming flower. They used to grow up on the east bank of the garden, and then these bright orange geums and the flax and green with the blue enamel glaze. There were lots of interesting features, as I say, all year round. And some of these have gone, they're no longer in the garden. We had periods of time where herbicide was used, and fragile plants like that just don't withstand that over time. So it's too bad. Those were an unusual feature in the garden.
So who owns these gardens? mean, they're on the college property. Does the college have anything to do with them? Do the people that run them have anything to do with them? The students have anything to do with them? Well, it depends what decade you're in. I can tell you from experience that some people suddenly will come to Hiram and they'll say, well, we own this garden and I guess we have to clean up this mess. We don't like the way it looks. And so herbicide on everything. And then all this hard work goes. And other people come to visit and they say, wow, it's the most unusual plant I've seen. And I know my plants. And the next thing you know, the plants are gone. So who owns these public gardens? And they especially disappear from Castle. Well, there's a fence around the garden. It wasn't meant to protect it from people who pilfer, but it's the perching fence, of course, in the middle of Rachel, Lindsay, and his sister. And the perching fence was historic, built around the original Western Reserve Eclectic Institute building. Too bad we don't have that building still, what a gem. And along the far side, there was a trellis put up because at one time there was just a driveway there and it was meant to block the view. But we removed the trellis when the admission office was moved and when the library was put in so there could be access. Hers really is a 4-season garden. It's not just the summer that Valerie designed for. She had designed for winter. All those grasses in the winter are meant to be there. They're not meant to be messy. They're there to bring interest. So it just doesn't look like some lawnmower came through and mowed it over. In the autumn, there's all these asters that move in naturally on the right-hand side. And you can see that puffball mushrooms come back all the time. And boy, that's a good season as you can find them up. Constant maintenance. The original garden fence was put in, but it wasn't made from treated lumber, so it rotted out. And luckily, I can say that the very last thing I did with my father was to completely rebuild the fence. He came in his 80s and we put in new fencing together and we used treated lumber. And so that fencing is still there. So I have warm thoughts every time I go by, but it takes hundreds of hours to keep up just one garden. And Jamie came from lumber money, from Mobile. Her sister was queen of the Mardi Gras in Mobile. Jamie was a really big stature. And if she came and said, Denny, I want you all to help out, you had no choice but to help out. And Jim was the same way as Dave, and others will tell you. Certainly, when she had this vision for the Hiram Gardens as a group are second to none anywhere in Cleveland. Hiram Gardens, in terms of the maintenance personnel who maintain them, is second to none in terms of how few people there are to maintain them. And indeed, we are equal to places like the Villa Borghese in Rome. For 500 years, they've struggled with their gardens going through bust, and then they're great, and then they're terrible, and then they're great. We went to gardens in Florence this last spring, and indeed, they're 500 years old, and they have constantly they have to repair stonework and do things. Well, it's not so bad that we've only been 50 years around, and we've gone through 3 or 4 rebuildings at the same time, that we have gardens that have brought international attention to Hiram. And if we invest in them as a group and get people to realize what's there, it can be very, very important. The paths have to be maintained too. People always say, what are you doing? Weeding those paths. Well, it looks terrible if we don't. On the left, you can see this little plastic edging that we put in for economical reasons. The poor kids who put it in the driest summer in recorded history in Hiram, and for pounding it in. It took half the summer just to get the plastic in, but it was there for 10 years, and then of course it got broken as well. So it's out now, and there's a more natural. And we're back. Oh, wait a minute. And change too. The gardens don't stay the same. In the middle on the right is the planting when the fountain wasn't there, when the urn wasn't there. The first urn was pushed over, broke. And so somebody got a second urn, pushed over, broke. And so we said, oh, put something in, they can't push over. We got the big lion. It froze. We had to get another one. So it's really a constant source of change. The impact of nature and of humans is dramatic on all the gardens. just after we put the new gravel in, with dozens of students coming and slaving away on campus day, we had a rainstorm that washed away a foot of gravel in the past. Within 2 days, it was like that. We had to come back and replace it. We also have, as I mentioned, people that come in and they think, oh, well, it's fine. This is a playground for my kids. And so the kids go through it. And I like kids, I like dogs, but I don't like them in my gardens. And that's my own personal gardens. And it's too bad when you have all these things and people don't recognize the value of them.
So, in addition to our general maintenance and just keeping up with problems of erosion and other things that are happening that have to be corrected, we also like to offer to the garden interns in the summertime an opportunity to choose a project that they might want to work on. And one of those projects a few years ago was a storybook hour that included adults, parents and family, children coming in to hear a story read to them. Here it is. Darren and then Erica were the two interns working that summer. And afterwards they had some refreshments and it made for a really nice day. And it'd be lovely to continue to do that year to year, but it takes some planning and it's not out of the question. So something we'd like to do more. One of the other gardens, the Mahan House and Medicinal Herb Garden, Nick Zimmett was, well, originally the Barrows put in a lovely border of tetraploid, the large flowered cultivars of daylilies that was brilliant and lovely, and that's been a wonderful addition. They also planted some other their peonies and ferns and rhododendrons in the front, and so there are a variety of plants. And then you'll notice those pots, and for many years those terracotta pots were taken care of by David Anderson over and over, and then the kids have we still bring them out each year, and the kids come out and plant them, and so that's part of their maintenance. But one year, I think it was around 2003, Denny came and said, there's a student, Nick Zimmett, who's a pre-med, he's interested in alternative medicine. So he was very fascinated with all the different herbal medicines and things, and he wanted to learn about the plants that produce these tinctures and different things. So we talked about that and we spent time researching it, and he figured out and created a design to put along this brick terrace that you can't see from this angle. But anyway, he developed a whole program. He developed 6 pages of web information that he gathered and researched, and then we planted initially this part and then added in some brick steps and brick sandstone blocks to create a step way down, and then brick walkways. And that garden is still there and still very it's still growing, and Nick has gone on, he's become a medical doctor, and interest still very much into alternative medicine. So a lot of these gardens have impacts and have ways to help people move along in towards their career paths. And so these were, we developed in the process of working on the gardens, we also developed some descriptions and brochures to circulate about the gardens. This is one view of the early spring garden with the herbs in the foreground and those beautiful iris that come in late May, early June. And here again, this was another version of our brochures that we developed. I think Dan Scott worked on this one, and then the other piece, this is that gardens don't have to be just pretty places. They're also places to teach, and there are also many ways that you can teach. And one of them was that Frank Samuel, who was an alumni and I believe a trustee at a later time, came to Denny first and said, you know, I have an idea about something that we might try at Hiram, and you know, it'd be fun if we could get a group of people together and see if we can get some traction behind this idea and take a proposal to the president. And so we did, and the name of it was the Hiram Green Inc. And the idea was that you could get the students excited in an entrepreneurial effort where they would become in charge of the landscape and that they would be responsible and run it like a business and learn all the aspects of running a business. And it seemed like a great idea. We weren't able to convince the powers that be that this was such a great idea, but I think it was a wonderful effort, and Frank was really great. He himself is a lawyer and a businessman, and I think the plan had a lot of merit. It's something that maybe we'll revisit at a later time. So sustainability, here we are again. Again, we're looking at, you know, you can't just walk away and leave these for a while. There were times, as Denny mentioned, that we didn't have control over the gardens, and so there were great efforts to bring them back into control. And it is again this struggle of, you know, defining who owns the gardens, who wants to take responsibility for them, and if they take responsibility, do they understand how the gardens work, what the plants are, what's valuable, what's not valuable, and also who uses the gardens. And we hope that people understand that these aren't gardens you have to pay to go see. These are gardens you can walk into. You can go out in the middle of exam time and sit down and just get a few moments to refresh your mind. The gardens also, I mean, there are many, like everything else, there are a lot of different purposes to the garden. Dwight Bird was the professor of botany who I studied with, and I feel very lucky to have studied with when I was here at Hiram. Unfortunately, he's no longer here, but Dwight was involved in selecting plants to plant around the landscape on the campus, throughout the campus. And many of those trees and shrubs became part of how he taught vascular, that's the shrubs and trees and in identifying them, and many different, he used the plants that were all around the campus to tell about different aspects of botany. And then there are other ways that you can use the gardens for, as Denny suggested, you know, people enjoy exercising, or with your kids play, you know, that they're playgrounds and time, you know, it just is, but they can also be for outdoor observation, and there's so many other uses. It's really, if you have the imagination, you can find all kinds of creative ways to use the gardens.
So several slides back, when we were looking at one of the gardens, Century House, there was a picture of Forrest Smith, who was a classmate of Dave and mine. And Forrest was larger than life. He just knew so much. He knew a lot about plants. Lucy knows more, but I mean, he knew an awful lot. He was a great inspiration. He came to me and said, "You've got to get Hiram involved in biomonitoring." So I learned the procedures, and that became the beginning of a research path in education. And he came to us and said, "You have to start gardens, you have to maintain gardens." There would be no gardens today in Hiram once the Barrows retired and Layton retired, if it were not for Forrest, because Forrest really organized everyone to try to maintain this legacy over the last 20 years. And that really is much to his credit, but he always was doing it by being on the cutting edge. He put us in touch with the Ohio Learning Network. And in 2001, we had the first digital assistants that were used for gardens and trying to understand gardens, just like we use our smartphones today. This was long before that. And Forrest had us working and getting grants to get people involved with personal digital assistants, and to tie it to the best way to use those, not for technology, but to increase learning. So from that, we ended up getting small grants that built into bigger grants that eventually led to $3.5 million of grants to Hiram College, starting with gardens and ending with gardens, and in between working with the State Department and the Ohio Board of Regents and others. We took over 100 students to 40 different conferences, national and international, talking about gardens. And oftentimes we take our students and they'd be the only students at the conference, you know, be 200 faculty members and Hiram students talking about how to use technology in the gardens and other things later on with international programs. Students, alumni, faculty, trustees, partners all work together to make these gardens, and they work together to maintain it. This is one presentation we did in Washington, D.C., run by the National Science Foundation, CENSOR, the Science Education for New Civic Engagements and Responsibilities. You can see the people on the list include not only students and professors, but alumni. Our partners from international organizations were part of it as well. And what impressed CENSOR was how much of a community this little place Hiram had, and it was all based on things that started with Forrest and with gardens here at Hiram. Our first presentation was called Growing Garden Communities and Minds with Digital Nutrients. And this was in 2004 at a conference, the Ohio Digital Commons for Education Conference, where our students, once again, were the people leading the program, not people who were on the faculty. We had one of the first gardens anyplace. Before we had internet in the gardens, we had little QR codes out there. This is from 2002. That as soon as QR codes became available, we had students who were adapting them, because the best thing to do with technology when students say, well, what are we going to do with it? Is for us to say, you're asking me what we're going to do with technology, figure it out and come back. We'll get you the money. We can do that, but you figure out what we need to do. And certainly that idea was what Frank had in mind with the Hiram Green internship, which we were never able quite to bring about, but we did a little bit. We also built web pages. We had probably 30 pages when the faculty and students built the web pages instead of colleges. And this was common back in the days when we had people like Valerian Anderson here in educational technology. And we built those. We had even a database, thanks to Ellen Walker, of the different plants that were in all the gardens. And you can go and access that database and go immediately to pages. So the faculty and students created these web pages. This was all stuff that students thought, well, we're getting paid for, but then eventually it turns into part of their education as well. So what are our next steps?
So here we are. It's 2023. Denny and I have been working on the gardens for a number of years, like decades. And we love the gardens. You can see all the different people that took charge over many years. And we still need the same things, the funding that's needed, and finding that funding, and sometimes trying to track down funds that used to be there but aren't there. But we also still have lots of students here, and unfortunately, we've had this difficult period of pandemic, but it doesn't mean that we can't start regenerating groups of people and getting them excited. Back in I think it was 2005, there was a period where we hadn't been allowed in the gardens for various reasons, and there was a group called the Sustainability Club, which I think still exists maybe on campus, I'm not sure. But the kids came to us and they said, look, we want to take over the gardens. And we knew that might not last very long. In fact, it only lasted a few weeks, but they did, they came. They did come and they started working on the gardens. So there was interest and the kids did organize and they put an effort. Unfortunately, exams came and you know what happens, it just, and then the end of the year. So it's sort of, but it kind of got us sparked again and we got going. So it's not impossible. It takes time, yes, and it takes effort, but we can find funding and we can get people organized and do things. And I think the gardens are a civilizing influence on communities, and they're an important part in all our lives. They bring a lot of richness and diversity, and I hope that you share our understanding and can hear some of the things that we've been doing over the years, and maybe you want to help organize. We're glad to help organize, but we have to also think about the future and who's going to take on the mantle of carrying these forward. So as much as we enjoy and will continue to work on the gardens, we also need to be making plans and thinking ahead. And we'd like to thank a lot of people. We can't even name all the students and the alumni and the faculty, but certainly a lot of the professors and Rain Hansel, who early on saw the value of these gardens. He was involved in the community and principal of Crestwood High School, I think at one time, and other things. Frank Samuel, Valerie Forrest, just look something. Anyway, we thank you all for coming tonight, and we hope we've generated some conversation and some ideas. So we're happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Yes, thank you. Please do ask questions. They are a fount of knowledge. I think you probably spent about 10, 15 hours in the archives working on this presentation. So thank you for that. What questions do you have? And if anybody has questions in the Zoom, please put them in the chat.
Those lists of Do those lists of plants in the gardens currently still exist in any accessible form? I'd like to see those.
Absolutely, they're up in the the Herd Garden has an extensive list that is part of the design, and that's very much available. And you can work with Janet in arranging time to go up and look at that. And
But are the plants still there? And the answer in many cases is no. And part of that is that the trees grow, and what were open gardens become shade gardens, and the plants can adapt and so forth. So even the ones that we thought were appropriate back then to thrive, maybe 40 years later, they aren't here. So there are lots of good things, but the best resource of all is standing right next to me. Take and walk with her around the gardens, and she'll fill you in. She can tell you what continent it came from, what the soil conditions are, what are necessary to make it grow. And Dave back, it's not so bad.
well, it is true. I can help if anybody wants, just contact us. I'm very serious about this. We'd love to share what we know about the plants. It's not about us just sitting there working away in the gardens day after day. It's about sharing that information and passing it on. But also we've tried to substitute new plants that are vigorous and tolerant of the conditions. And as Denny says, adapted to more, actually we're dealing with a lot more shade in Herd Garden than ever. If you look at the early shots of Herd Garden, it was wide open. It was like a pancake almost as far as full sun exposure, and now it's shade. So we have to figure out, new plantings and things. So make use of the resources right here now. Let's hear.
So what's the plan for this summer?
Well, Lucy and I are gonna do another year, but I'm making it known, that this is my last year working in the gardens, full-time leading them. And we have to talk about what does that mean? What gardens change and they adapt. Does it mean when all the gardens are in their glory, Hiram is equal to the best gardens I've been to see anywhere in the world? They aren't as expensive and as big maybe, but they are equally as important, and certainly the educational resources that we built over the years were second to none. I've not even seen 20 years later people doing what we were doing back then. But at the same time, if they're not maintained, they're terrible, and we need to know that. And if we can't find a way to maintain them, we need to pull out all the plants and cover it with grass seed and mow them until the next group of people come and decide that they want to do something with it. Because to see them just turn into the weed patches like have come from time to time, it's just heartbreaking for any of us who keep gardens. So if anyone's inspired and wants to help, or you know people who would like to help, it really is a blast. The time that we've had working in the garden when people come by, it's wonderful when it gets into its best form.
I absolutely agree. I think you have to be realistic and, as Denny says, you know, maybe it's better to turn it into grass for a period of time and then revisit it at a later time. But hopefully not. There's some wonderful plantings there. The backbones are there. It's just a matter of having people to help perpetuate it over time. And so.
How do your efforts coordinate with the college's landscaping teams and crews and so forth?
Well, the understanding is that the Hiram Public Gardens are maintained by the members of the Hiram Public Garden. You're seeing two primary members. I'm not sure how many more we have, but right now, but you know, we've come to that agreement for the moment that we won't have landscapers these days. They know how to mow and blow and then they're gone, and they don't even know the plants. In our past experiences, people have come in with gallons, literally gallons of Roundup and just, you know, willy-nilly used it both on the beds and the paths. And we're basically an organic gardening group. We don't like to use herbicides, but there are times when a judicial use, a very specific targeted use of herbicide may be necessary, you know, once or twice, but not constant, you know, just bathing the garden. So we really oppose that kind of approach, and it's not healthy for any of the people, the staff, the administration, the students being exposed to that either. So we're very cognizant of that, and we don't give policy to the rest of the landscape maintenance people, but we would prefer if everybody would take on that policy just for the health of the general population here in Hiram. So. Yes.
Will there be any future opportunities for internships in Northern Garden?
Well, we have to have our arms twisted because some of us are retired.
No, every year about this time, and if you leave us your name and contact information, we have an application form and we can send it out. And if you know other people that might be interested, and they're what, 8 weeks usually.
They're usually 8 to 10 weeks, but we also have work study money that we've used in the past. The money has come and gone, but certainly we try to work around what works with the students. And it's worked out fairly well in the past. It's just that you never have enough. When we were down at the 50 acres of gardens in Miami, Florida, at Vizcaya, we asked how many interns they had. They said they had one. And she had just been at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden and had been working in Lucy's garden. So she was just really impressed to meet the designer of the garden. But they also had 7 full-time gardeners. We do not have 7 full-time gardeners. So it's always been, what do the students learn? But boy, can you learn a lot if you hang around Lucy for a little bit of time. Me, not so much, but
I met Hiram in 1985. And in the time that I've been associated with Hiram, I've seen a huge change in the village. The people who were new then are not new anymore, and there's a turnover. Do you think that that might be one reason you have difficulty attracting people to work on these projects, because they're not associated with the past, the things that get us excited about Hiram, the past and where we can go with it towards the future?
Yeah, I had to dig through the Hiram Historical Society records because of issues that came up this year. And then we dug through the records for this. And then we're also digging through the records for the Couch Organic Farm, which is where the Hiram Farm is right now. And if you look at all of those and then you read what's happening all around the country, and you look at the list of the $600 that were donated, 4 of the groups that donated $400 of the $600 were all groups that don't exist practically in any community. A Hiram Faculty Women's Group, a Hiram History Group. There were 2 others that just are off the face of the earth. And what were the other 2? The Village of Hiram. And the Village of Hiram has huge issues in terms of finances right now. They can't afford to give a donation for this. And also the Township of Hiram. And the township likes to get money, but they also don't have money. So it's been a sea change in terms of how we view community, I think, nationwide. And one of the things that I love about the gardens is that I believe that they help us to learn about democratic decision-making in building community. Because we always try to model, they'll come and say, well, what are we supposed to do? And what Jim Barrow told us is, I don't know, what are you gonna do? And then we had to figure it out for ourselves. And that's true with the gardens too. If you get the students to solve their own problems, they'll always be able to do it. But if you say, oh, we have to tell you what to do, it's not going to work. We all know that from hands-on learning. So.
I know that the village, I know the village financial situation. Is there the possibility though that the village could sponsor a couple of times a year? Let's get together and have and work in our gardens, something where the people who have moved here become aware of this is their chance to work in our gardens. Well, not my gardens because I don't live here, but I've worked here for many years. So
They're your gardens too, Lisa.
There's money in an account that was given by Rainey Hansel that's split between Hiram Beautification and the Hiram Public Gardens. And then there are other monies at the college that from time to time are used for the gardens, or sometimes are used for other gardens around campus. So there's always a possibility, but my feeling is after reading all the stuff at the Bardini and the Bogolini Gardens, who have 500 years of history, is that the things that work are the things that are organic, that different groups of people come in with an interest, and then they build the new structure that gets everybody to come together. So we're from the past, and I am part of the Jamie Barrow, Jim Barrow, Roland Layton past. So what is the next step, and how are the people that love the gardens going to come and say, how are we going to do this? And then how did you get money, and how do you do this? And we can help with that, but it really has to be other people that have this passion and this love for making the world a beautiful place.
fewer people in the village, then there are these opportunities for them to get involved.
I don't think so, because, you know, we haven't said those kind of things, but also there weren't opportunities back when the Barrows and the Laytons were there. It's just that they did it. And right now, there's also big problems like you look at the tree canopy in the United States. In Cleveland, it was the tree city. It was 40% trees, and now it's 17% going down every year, even with millions of dollars going into it. Hiram is known as this great green campus. And I'm going to give a talk for the Historical Society that looks at the 1990 or 1988 tree survey and what the trees are now. And in Hiram, I won't blow my story, but
And I,
and Hiram, we need to come and hear about just using the science tools that we have right now. There are really neat things, and if you can get the kids engaged, kids can get their parents to do things. So that's why it's so important to have high school and middle school programs, but mostly high school, because they can pressure their parents.
With the Hiram of the 1840s. You're right, there weren't a lot of trees there. I was just wondering, but it didn't look like it was under cultivation either. So, were the trees felled for cultivation and then the cultivation no longer took place?
Yeah, the trees were all felled to put in farms on soil that couldn't support things. And then when people realized that they just took more land westward, they could have good soil and bigger farms. Everybody said by 1850, oh, let's leave Hiram. It's not a good place to farm unless we got one of the good 120 or 160 acres, David, with the Western Reserve land grants where they took 150 acres, yeah, but if you didn't get a good piece of land, people were already leaving by 1850s, and it was one of the reasons I've heard that the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute was founded, was to keep a group of people in Hiram because the farms were failing all around us. And if you go out and look at the trees, that's what they look like. I mean, you see R1 untimbered beech maple, but then you see different stands of trees all around that were just in areas that couldn't support farm.
All right, time for one last question. Oh, I saw two. All right, two questions.
I just wanted to say that a lot of the deforestation were the early railroads. They really took a huge amount. I mean, that's the way steam was produced, on the trains. So they came in first. There was probably a bigger culprit than actually creating farms.
I guess, like, how do you envision students really engaging in this? Like, you mentioned having gardeners and other gardens. I know, like, the system, at least at the field station, is the land stewards who like obtain like the land to the field station. You potentially like see like gardening land stewards that could potentially like offer jobs and like also experience like without like within the bounds of gardens and stuff like that.
Lucy and I both think that we should dust off the Hiram Green proposal from Frank Sandy, because it really was one that said, okay, let's have students take over the whole campus, but let's give them the capabilities of doing it. And then they get money for doing it, and then they also get these skills that are transferable to those students. So anybody who's interested can come and talk with us, and we've got lots of documents that you can read. And there are also opportunities too. We're doing the Learning Streams program this summer, but our interns are really only working for a short period of time in the summer. And so there would be opportunities to do some gardening as well. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I know that Denny's email is in the system. He's a professor emeritus, so he has a Hiram email address. So that's one way to reach him. You all can always just email library@hiram.edu, and I can connect you with Denny and Lucy as well. That might be the easiest thing to do. So thank you everybody for coming. I hope everybody had a wonderful time. I do have some of the documents and photos back there if you want to take a look. We do have white gloves if you want to touch anything. Please do enjoy, and thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you for the book sale and the Bristol Symposium, and we will have a spring program as well, date TBD. Thank you. Thank you.